Life had never been easy for Emily Carter. A single mother to a 7-year-old boy, Jake, she had been juggling 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, made breakfast with whatever scraps were left in the fridge, and kissed her son goodbye before rushing to work. Her days were long, exhausting, and thankless. Yet, she never let Jake see her struggle. She smiled through the pain, hid her worries behind bedtime stories, and made sure he always felt loved, even when she was breaking inside. That morning was no different. Emily pulled her long brown hair into a messy ponytail, threw on her worn-out sneakers, and rushed out the door with Jake's small hand in hers. They took the bus. She couldn't afford a car, heading toward his school. "Mommy, will you be home early today?" Jake asked, his innocent blue eyes filled with hope. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'll try, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. But they both knew the truth. Her evening shift at the diner meant she wouldn't be home until late. She dropped Jake off, hugged him tightly, and ran to catch another bus to her first job at a grocery store. She stocked shelves all morning, her back aching, her hands dry and cracked from handling boxes. By noon, she grabbed a cup of cheap coffee and headed to the diner for her second shift. The greasy smell of burgers and fries clung to her uniform as she took orders, cleaned tables, and tried to ignore the rude customers who barely acknowledged her presence. It was during that shift that her life changed forever. Emily was wiping down a booth when she heard a deep, familiar voice. She glanced up and nearly dropped the rag in her hand. Standing right there, larger than life, was none other than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Her heart pounded. Was she dreaming? She had seen him in movies, watched him in interviews, but never in her wildest imagination did she think he'd walk into this run-down diner. The entire restaurant fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on the superstar. Emily, trying to steady herself, approached his table. "Welcome to Joe's Diner. Can I get you anything?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. The Rock smiled, his warmth cutting through the tension in the air. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked. Emily," she stammered. "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said. "I'll take whatever you recommend." She scribbled down an order, still in disbelief. As she walked away, she felt the stares of the other customers. It wasn't every day that a Hollywood star sat in their midst, but what Emily didn't know was that this wasn't just some random visit. Dwayne Johnson was there for a reason, and soon, Emily's world was about to change in a way she never saw coming. Emily's hands trembled as she placed the order slip on the counter. The kitchen staff peeked over, whispering among themselves, "The Rock," in their diner. It felt surreal, but Emily had no time to process the shock. Her shift wasn't going to slow down just because a celebrity had walked in. She refilled coffee cups, cleared plates, and forced herself to stay focused, though she kept sneaking glances at the booth where he sat. Unlike most customers, Dwayne Johnson wasn't glued to his phone. He smiled at everyone, nodding politely when someone passed by, making people feel at ease despite his larger-than-life presence. When the cook slid his plate onto the counter, Emily took a deep breath, steadied herself, and walked over. "Here you go," she said, placing the plate in front of him. "Thanks, Emily." His voice was as warm as his smile. He glanced at her name tag and then at her face, as if memorizing both. "How long have you worked here?" Emily hesitated. "Almost 3 years," she admitted, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "It's not the easiest job, but it pays the bills." The Rock nodded, taking a bite of his burger. "Hard work is no joke. You're doing what you need to do. That takes strength." His words caught her off guard. She wasn't used to customers acknowledging her, let alone a world-famous actor recognizing her struggle. She felt her throat tighten. "Yeah, well, I try," she said with a small shrug, trying to keep the emotion from her voice. "Got any kids?" he asked casually. Emily hesitated before answering. "Yeah, my son, Jake. He's 7. At the mention of her son, the Rock's face lit up. "7's a fun age. He must keep you on your toes." Emily chuckled softly. "Oh, definitely. He's my whole world." Dwayne smiled but didn't press further. Instead, he ate his meal, occasionally chatting with her when she passed by. Other customers whispered, trying to work up the courage to approach him, but he remained relaxed, treating the small diner like any other place. As he finished his food, he waved her over again. "Hey, Emily, do me a favor?" Sure. Can I get the check?" She blinked. "Oh, yeah, of course." She reached for her notepad, but before she could tear off the receipt, he held up a hand. "Actually," he said, his smile turning playful, "can you add everyone's meal to mine?" Emily froze. "Wait, you want to pay for everyone here?" "Yeah," he said with a grin. "Let's call it a good day for good people." Her heart raced as she looked around the diner. Every customer stared in shock. Some gasped, others teared up. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She had seen kindness before, but never on this level, and she had a feeling. This was only the beginning. The diner erupted into a mix of stunned silence and murmurs of disbelief. Emily stood frozen, the checkbook still in her hand, as the weight of the Rock's generosity settled over the room. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dwayne Johnson chuckled. "Dead serious. Let's take care of these folks today." A few customers overheard and gasped. An elderly couple in the corner exchanged teary-eyed glances. A young father, holding a fussy toddler, looked as though a weight had just been lifted from his shoulders. Slowly, the realization spread, and the diner buzzed with excitement. A burly trucker sitting at the counter shook his head in disbelief. "You mean to tell me you're paying for all our meals? Just like that?" The Rock smiled and shrugged. "Why not? Everyone deserves a little kindness." Emily swallowed hard, blinking away the sudden sting of tears. She had worked at this diner for years, seen people come and go, struggling just as she was. There were regulars who counted their pennies before ordering a meal, parents who split a plate so their kids could eat more, lonely elders who came just to have a conversation with someone. And today, for just a moment, all those struggles didn't exist. She hurried to the register, her hands still shaking as she rang up the orders. The total was staggering, but when she handed the receipt to the Rock, he barely glanced at it before pulling out his wallet. "You know," he said as he slid his credit card across the counter, "people like you are the real heroes. You work hard, take care of your family, and keep pushing forward. That's strength." Emily could barely breathe. No one had ever told her that before. Most days, she felt invisible, just another exhausted worker trying to make it through the day. But in that moment, he saw her. As the transaction went through, the entire diner erupted into applause. Some people clapped, others cheered, and a few simply sat there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. An elderly woman approached him with trembling hands. "Bless your heart, young man," she said, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "You have no idea what this means to us." The Rock bent down slightly, taking her hands in his. "You take care of yourself, okay?" he said gently. As he turned back to Emily, he leaned in slightly. "Do you mind if I meet Jake?" Her heart nearly stopped. You want to meet my son?" "Yeah," he said with a grin. "I think he's got a pretty awesome mom." Emily's breath hitched. She didn't know what was happening, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope, and she had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Emily could barely wrap her head around what was happening. The Rock, had just paid for an entire diner's meals, and now he wanted to meet her son. It felt surreal, like some kind of dream she might wake up from any moment. She cleared her throat, still struggling to find her voice. Yeah, I mean, of course. Jake would love to meet you." Dwayne grinned. "Awesome. When do you get off your shift?" Emily glanced at the clock. She still had a few hours left, but suddenly, something in her gut told her to take a chance. Maybe just this once she could put herself and her son first. I'll see if my manager will let me go early," she said hesitantly. The Rock chuckled. "Tell them, the Rock needs you for an important mission." Emily let out a breathless laugh as she hurried to the back. Her manager, a grumpy older man named Frank, was already scowling. "Emily, what's going on out there? First, the whole diner's buzzing. Now you're asking for time off? She bit her lip. I know it's last minute, but Dwayne Johnson just asked if he could meet my son. I don't even know how to explain it, but I think this is something really important. Frank narrowed his eyes at her, then glanced out at the dining area, where The Rock was casually chatting with customers, taking selfies and laughing like he belonged there. With a heavy sigh, he waved a hand. Fine, go. But don't expect special treatment every time a celebrity walks in. Emily could have hugged him. Thank you, Frank, really. She rushed out, untied her apron, and grabbed her bag. When she returned, The Rock stood by the door, waiting for her. Let's go surprise Jake, he said, leading the way outside. Emily had never felt so self-conscious walking beside someone. He was a literal giant, and she was just an exhausted waitress in second-hand sneakers. But if he noticed, he didn't act like it. Instead, he chatted with her like an old friend, asking questions about Jake, about her life, about what she dreamed of. They took the bus. Emily felt ridiculous at the idea of a Hollywood megastar sitting next to her on a public bus, but The Rock seemed unbothered. People gawked, some asked for pictures, but he remained kind to everyone. When they finally arrived at Jake's school, Emily felt her nerves kick in. What if Jake freaked out? What if the teachers thought she was lying? But all worries faded the moment Jake ran out of the school doors, his tiny backpack bouncing against his back. His face lit up when he saw his mom. Then his eyes widened in disbelief when he saw the man standing beside her. Jake froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The Rock crouched down to his level, grinning. Hey, buddy, I hear you're pretty awesome. Jake blinked. Then, in the tiniest, most awestruck voice, he whispered, You're The Rock. Emily's heart swelled. This was a moment neither of them would ever forget, and somehow she knew this was only the beginning. Jake stood there, frozen, his little hands gripping the straps of his backpack like he was afraid to move. His wide eyes darted between his mother and the towering man in front of him, his brain clearly struggling to process the fact that The Rock was standing right there. Emily chuckled nervously. Jake, sweetheart, say hi. Jake swallowed hard, then finally managed to squeak out, hi. The Rock grinned. Hi, Jake. Your mom tells me you're a pretty cool kid. Jake looked up at Emily, his little face still full of shock. Mom, is this real? She laughed, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. Yeah, baby, it's real. Jake suddenly turned back to The Rock, his excitement finally catching up to him. Wait, are you really you? Like, can you do the eyebrow thing? The Rock chuckled, then raised his famous eyebrow, watching as Jake's jaw dropped. No way, Jake whispered. Then, in the next second, he burst into laughter, his awe turning into pure joy. Dwayne playfully nudged his shoulder. I like you, kid. You got good energy. He glanced at Emily. Hey, I was thinking, how about we go grab some food? My treat. Emily hesitated. She was still wrapping her head around everything that had happened today, and now he wanted to take them out. Oh, you don't have to. The Rock held up a hand. Nah, I want to. You and Jake deserve a good meal together. Jake bounced excitedly on his feet. Can we get burgers or pizza or whatever you want, little man, The Rock said. Today is all about you and your mom. Emily's heart clenched. When was the last time she had taken Jake out for a meal that wasn't from the dollar menu? She was always too busy working, too stressed about bills. The idea of sitting down, relaxing, and just being with her son for once, it almost made her want to cry. She blinked back the emotion and nodded. Okay, yeah, that sounds amazing. They ended up at a family-friendly restaurant not too far from the school. Jake talked a mile a minute, his excitement impossible to contain. He asked The Rock 1,000 questions about wrestling, about movies, about how much he could bench press. And through it all, Dwayne answered him with patience, never making him feel like a burden. But then, in the middle of his excited chatter, Jake suddenly paused and looked at The Rock seriously. You know my mom works really hard, he said, his voice quieting. She doesn't get a lot of fun days like this. Emily felt her breath hitch. Jake? But The Rock leaned forward, nodding solemnly. Yeah, buddy, I know. Jake frowned. I just wish he didn't have to work so much. Emily swallowed hard, reaching for her son's hand. Jake, we're okay, we manage. But the Rock's expression changed, like he was thinking, planning. And Emily had no idea that at that very moment he was already working on a way to change their lives forever. Emily sat frozen, her fingers lightly gripping Jake's hand as his words hung in the air. The Rock didn't just smile and nod this time. He looked at her, really looked at her, like he saw every exhaustion-lined worry she had been carrying for years. Jake took another bite of his burger, blissfully unaware of the weight of what he had just said. But Emily wasn't. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like someone had pulled back the curtain on her struggles. She cleared her throat, forcing a smile. Jake, sweetheart, we've talked about this. Hard work is a part of life. But why do you have to work so much? Jake pressed, his small voice laced with innocent frustration. You're always tired, and we never get to do stuff like this. It's not fair. Emily felt her chest tighten. She didn't want him to see her struggle. Not like this. The Rock leaned forward, resting his massive arms on the table. Hey, Jake, can I tell you a secret? Jake's eyes widened. A real secret? Yep, the Rock said with a smirk. You know, when I was a kid, my mom worked super hard too. We didn't always have a lot of money. Sometimes we didn't even have a home. Jake gasped. You were poor? Really poor, the Rock admitted. There were times when we had to live in our car, or when my mom cried because she didn't know how to pay rent. But you know what? She never gave up. And you know what else? He nodded toward Emily. Your mom? She's just like mine. She's strong. Emily swallowed hard, her emotions bubbling too close to the surface. She wasn't used to people saying things like that about her. Jake beamed up at her. Yeah, my mom's the strongest person ever. Emily laughed lightly, ruffling his hair. Oh, I don't know about that. The Rock shook his head. No, really? What you're doing? Working 2 jobs, raising a kid on your own? That's tougher than anything I've ever done. And I've wrestled a lot of big, scary dudes. Emily felt her face heat up, but before she could say anything, he continued. Listen, I didn't just come to that diner today for a meal, he said, his tone shifting slightly. I went there because I love supporting hardworking people. And when I saw you, Emily, I saw someone who reminded me of my own mom. Someone who gives everything for her kid and asks for nothing in return. Emily's breath caught. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. So, the Rock continued, leaning back with a grin, I was thinking, how about I make things a little easier for you? She blinked. What? What do you mean? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table to her. Open it. With shaky hands, Emily picked it up and carefully lifted the flap. As soon as she saw what was inside, her breath hitched. Her hands trembled. Her eyes widened. It was a check for $50,000. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. I can't. Jake's eyes darted between them. Mom? What is it? Emily's vision blurred with tears. It's enough to change everything. She looked up at the Rock, completely speechless, but he just smiled. Consider it a thank you, he said, for being an amazing mom. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she stared at the check, her hands trembling. $50,000. It didn't feel real. Her mind raced. This money could pay off her overdue bills, cover rent for an entire year, maybe even let her cut back on one of her jobs so she could spend more time with Jake. But then, just as quickly as the excitement hit, doubt crept in. She looked up at the Rock, shaking her head. I can't take this. It's too much. The Rock chuckled, leaning back in his seat. Emily, listen to me. This isn't charity. It's a thank you. A thank you for all the late nights, the early mornings, the sacrifices you've made for Jake. You deserve this. Emily swallowed hard. Her entire life, she had fought for every single penny, every meal, every hour of sleep. No one had ever handed her anything. And now, this man, this incredible, kind man, was offering her a way out of the never-ending struggle. Jake, oblivious to the weight of her emotions, was practically bouncing in his seat. Mom? That means you don't have to work all the time, right? You can come to my school plays and soccer games." Emily's heart clenched. The thought of being able to say yes to Jake, to be present for him instead of rushing from job to job, was overwhelming. "But it's just so much," she whispered. The Rock leaned forward, his expression kind but firm. "Emily, let me ask you something. If the situation were reversed, if you had this money and saw someone working themselves to the bone for their kid, wouldn't you want to help them?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course." "Then don't overthink it," he said with a warm smile. "You deserve good things too." Emily felt the last bit of resistance crumble inside her. For the first time in years, she let go of the idea that she had to struggle to prove she was strong. Maybe, just maybe, accepting kindness was its own kind of strength. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the check to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The Rock winked at Jake. "You take care of your mom, little man." Jake grinned. "I will, and I'm going to get so good at soccer now that she can come watch me play." Emily laughed through her tears, ruffling his hair. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The Rock stood up, towering over them, but his presence felt more like that of an old friend than a superstar. "I gotta head out, but I want you to promise me something." Emily wiped her tears and nodded. "Anything. Use this money to make life easier," he said. "Take a break, make memories, and most importantly, believe that you deserve happiness." She exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in a long, long time. "I promise." As the Rock walked away, people in the restaurant clapped and cheered. Emily sat there, still gripping the check, still overwhelmed. Jake looked up at her with a big smile. "Mom, can we get dessert?" Emily laughed. And for the first time in years, she didn't have to check her wallet before saying, "Yes, baby, anything you want." For the first time, she knew things were going to be okay. The days that followed felt like a dream. For the first time, and as long as Emily could remember, she wasn't drowning in stress. She wasn't running from one job to the next, barely seeing Jake except to tuck him in at night. She had quit her morning job at the grocery store, cutting her work hours in half. The bills were paid, actually paid, with money left over to finally breathe. She had even gone shopping with Jake for the first time in forever, buying him new sneakers and a backpack that wasn't falling apart. And best of all, she had time. Time to walk Jake to school. Time to help him with his homework. Time to sit with him at dinner instead of rushing out the door to her next shift. Time to finally be the mom she had always wanted to be. One evening, about a week after the Rock had walked into her life, she sat on the couch watching Jake as he played with his action figures on the floor. She still couldn't believe this was real, that the weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. Jake looked up suddenly, his little face full of curiosity. "Mom?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" He set down his toys and scooted closer to her. "Do you think the Rock is like a real superhero?" Emily chuckled. "He's definitely got the muscles for it." "No, I mean like he saves people. Not just in movies, like us." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yeah, baby," she whispered. "I think he's a real superhero." Jake grinned, satisfied with that answer, and went back to playing. But Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. Dwayne Johnson had changed her life, not just with the money, but with his kindness. With the simple act of seeing her, of reminding her that she mattered, that her struggles weren't invisible, that she deserved good things too, and she realized something else. Kindness is powerful. Maybe she couldn't pay it forward in the same way the Rock had, but she could pass on the kindness. She could tip a little extra at a coffee shop. She could help another struggling mom at Jake's school. She could remind someone that they were seen. The Rock had given her more than just money. He had given her hope, and hope was meant to be shared. She smiled, reaching for her phone. She had written a thank you message to him a few days ago but hadn't sent it yet. This time, she hit send. "Emily, you changed my life. You gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. I promise I'll pass it on." A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Dwayne Johnson. That's all I ask. Keep being amazing, Emily. And tell Jake I said hi." Tears welled in her eyes again, But this time, they weren't from exhaustion or fear. They were from happiness. She looked down at Jake, still playing, still safe, still happy. For the first time in a long, long time, everything felt right. And she knew this was just the beginning. Life can change in an instant when kindness meets the right moment. Emily's story proves that even the smallest act of generosity can create a ripple effect of hope. What would you do if someone changed your life overnight? Comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more inspiring stories.